Hi there. Welcome to another behind the scenes bonus video. Today I thought I would go behind the scenes of an essay that was intended for this part of the series. It was going to touch on, it was going to expand upon, excuse me, something that I touch on in the previous post, You Really Can't Go Home Again. And that was the part about language. And I was going to expand on and go deeper into the story of how I don't speak either of my parents' native tongues. And it was a really tough essay to write. Uh, Firstly, because there is a lot of pain behind the story. And I had to really dive into things I'd never really taken apart before, and it was very uncomfortable to sit with a lot of it, to be honest. And I did do a previous post on this topic of, sitting through and writing through really uncomfortable, painful, or traumatic stories. And for this story, so first of all, it was, there was a lot of pain behind it, but also it required a lot of context and explanation and backstory and background, and I had to be protective of the people in the story in some way, and so I had to really find a way to write it that wasn't, clunky or too much exposition. And so the way I approached it was I really had to take it apart, like I was taking apart a machine. I took apart all the parts, and the first thing um, that I focused on was the outline of the story, the way I wanted the story to flow. So that became the structure. So I created a structure for the story, and that became my anchor for how I was going to approach this piece, always coming back to this structure. So I put things, what order do things need to be said in this story? So then once I had that structure, I identified, what are the easiest parts to write? Because some parts flowed much more easily. They just sort of wrote themselves in a way. And so I went through and I identified those parts. And I did something I've actually never done before, which was I actually numbered and labeled, what were the easiest parts of this story to write. And then I numbered and labeled the hardest parts to write. And then I wrote the easiest ones first, and put them within that structure that I had written. And with them in that structure, they then help to realign the other things that were going into the essay. Um, so when it was came time to write the hardest parts, I wrote them slowly. Like I wrote one part, and then I would give myself time and space. I would step away and come back to it. And in that coming back, would discover that I had an answer or a key for how to continue with the rest of writing the rest of this part and the rest of the story. Because you kind of like dump it all out. You just write everything out that you want to say. You step away, and in that stepping away, there is something that alchemizes on the page when you come back to it, and you find that you may have, the key to continuing, or you see something differently. And also in that stepping away, when you come back, you can ask like, now that that emotion has come out, the emotion that was tied to the story, how does it feel now? What still feels necessary to leave in? And what can I take out? What can I rewrite? Um, and the twist, the plot twist of the story is that I in the end decided not to include that essay in the series at all. It just became clear to me that it didn't quite belong in the series. Um, and so I took it out. And yet, I have no regrets over all the work that I put into that one, because that was the story that I actually spent the most time on and writing. And in the end, I took it out, but it was still so worthwhile for me to do the exercise of writing that story and figuring out how to tell the story. Um, and sometimes, as a writer, it's not about the final product. It's just about the journey, the process, the growing process. Is it's just as valuable, even if you don't something doesn't end up in the final piece. Um, yeah, I wanted to talk about, how it's more about the journey, and how that's really and there was also just so much joy in that process in learning how to approach, becoming more adept at approaching really difficult stories to write. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share for today. Thanks again for following along on this journey. And I am looking forward to sharing more with you. Any questions, comments, please do reach out. I love to hear from you. Thank you.